On the seafront at Torquay, the palm trees are still standing. They have lined the promenade for more than a century. The trees that once told arriving visitors they had reached England's own Mediterranean. Behind those palms sat hotels fit for emperors. Napoleon III stayed here, so did a King of England, and the woman who became one of the best-selling novelists in history. And yet walk 2 streets back from that glittering front today, and you are standing in one of the most deprived corners of England. This is the story of the English Riviera, a coastline that sold Britain an imitation of the Mediterranean and thrived for 100 years precisely because the real Mediterranean was out of reach. Then, in a single generation, the real thing came within reach of everyone, and the imitation had nothing left to sell. But before the fall, there was the improbable rise, and it began, of all places, with a war. For centuries, the northern shore of Torbay was nothing remarkable, a scatter of farming and fishing hamlets. In 1801, the little settlement of Torquay held around 830 people, barely a village and certainly no resort. What changed everything was Napoleon. During the long wars against France, the wide, sheltered bay became a favourite anchorage for the Channel Fleet, the wooden wall that stood between England and invasion. Warships rode at anchor in the calm water for weeks at a time, and the story goes that the wives and families of the officers came to the little town on the shore to be near their men, took lodgings and stayed. The account is romantic, and the local historians will tell you it is only partly true that Torquay was too small in those years to hold them all, but something in it holds. The war that closed the whole of Europe to wealthy English travellers also handed them a sheltered corner of Devon, with a soft, strange, almost foreign climate. If they could not sail to Italy, Italy would have to be built at home. A local landowner named Sir Lawrence Polk understood this before almost anyone. He had made the grand tour of Europe and he came back carrying Italian ideas in his head. He built a new harbour. He laid out elegant terraces of cream-coloured villas climbing the wooded hillsides, curved and columned and utterly unlike the plain grey towns of the English coast. When you looked up at them from the water, you could half believe you were looking at the Bay of Naples. Then came the doctors. Torquay had a secret, a mild, damp winter and long hours of winter sun, warmer than almost anywhere else in Britain. In an age when tuberculosis was killing the young by the thousand, and there was no cure but rest and air, that climate was worth more than gold. Physicians began sending their consumptive, wealthy patients south to Torquay for the winter to breathe. The town filled with invalids and the people who loved them, and it learned to call itself a place of health and happiness. Salus et felicitas, the motto went. It became known as the Queen of the watering places. The railway arrived in 1848, and after that the growth was extraordinary. From around 800 people at the start of the century, Torquay swelled to nearly 25,000 by 1887, and somewhere in those decades it acquired the name that would define it forever. Visitors comparing the villas and the light and the sheltered warmth to the coast of southern France began to call it the English Riviera. The name stuck. It is worth pausing on how strange that was. A cold, wet island nation had decided that one small stretch of Devon was its Mediterranean, and then set about making the fiction real. Walk the front today and you will see them everywhere, tall and spiky and tropical, the emblem of the whole coast printed on the postcards and stitched into the local football shirts. They look like the south of France. They are the proof, everyone assumes, that the climate here is different, and here is the quiet joke at the centre of the whole place. They are cabbage trees, carried over from New Zealand in Victorian times, a hardy import that survived the mild Devon winter and looked to English eyes wonderfully exotic, not a true palm among them. The Torbay palm, the great symbol of England's Mediterranean, was a piece of theatrical scenery from the other side of the world. The whole place was, in a sense, and for a very long time the illusion worked beautifully. By the second half of the 19th century, the English Riviera was one of the most fashionable resorts in the country. The grand hotels went up along the cliffs, vast and confident. The Imperial laid its foundation stone in 1864 and opened 2 years later, 50 bedrooms of deluxe accommodation offering, in the language of the time, comfort for gentlemen and families. And the guests it drew were the summit of European society. Napoleon III of France stayed on the coast. So did a Queen of the Netherlands and the future King Edward VII. Russian nobility built villas here. In the harbour below, the yachts of the wealthy crowded the water, and the Royal Torbay Yacht Club, up on the hill above the front, gave the season its rituals of regattas and receptions. Agatha Christie's own father would sit among its members. This was a coast that ran on leisure, on the slow choreography of the idle rich. In the summer of 1861, a nervous, exhausted, middle-aged naturalist arrived to take the air. He rented number 2 Hesketh Crescent, and he stayed by his own careful count 8 weeks and a day. His name was Charles Darwin, and only 2 years earlier he had published the book that shook the Victorian world to its foundations. Here on the Riviera, recovering from his own ill health, he spent his days studying how insects fertilise wild orchids in the fields above the town. The man who rewrote the story of life on Earth did some of his quietest work in the imitation Mediterranean. But the Riviera's most famous child was born here on the 15th of September 1890 in a large Victorian villa called Ashfield. Her name was Agatha Miller, and the world would come to know her as Agatha Christie. She grew up running through the gardens of Ashfield, swimming in the coves, roller skating on the pier, attending concerts at the Pavilion. On Christmas Eve of 1914, with the First Great War already darkening the world, she married a young airman, and the two of them spent their single night of honeymoon at the Grand Hotel on the seafront. She went on to write 66 novels, and to sell, by most counts, more than 2 billion copies, more than any novelist who has ever lived. And though the world took her away, she kept coming back to this coast, buying a white house above the River Dart in 1938 that she called the loveliest place in the world. Hold on to Agatha Christie's Ashfield. We will come back to that house and what was done to it, because it tells you everything. For now, understand the scale of what had been built. By the early 20th century, Torquay had made a deliberate decision. In 1902, it launched an advertising campaign to stop being merely a winter refuge for the dying and to start being a summer playground for the living, aimed at the prosperous families of the industrial Midlands and the North. Between the 2 world wars, the Great Western Railway poured money into selling the English Riviera to the nation, and the nation came. In 1948, when London hosted the Olympic Games, the sailing events were held right here in Torbay. The palm-lined promenade, the white villas on the hills, the yachts in the water. For 150 years, this was where Britain came to feel wealthy, warm and continental without ever leaving home, and that precisely was the trap. Because the entire promise of the English Riviera rested on a single unspoken condition. It was worth pretending you were on the Mediterranean only so long as you could not actually go to the Mediterranean. The palm trees, the Italian villas, the borrowed name, all of it was a substitute for something most British people would never see with their own eyes. Foreign travel, before the middle of the 20th century, meant ships and money and time that ordinary families simply did not have. The real Riviera belonged to the rich. The English one, in the end, belonged to everyone else. Then the aeroplane changed the arithmetic of the whole world. In the years after the Second War, the passenger jet arrived, and with it a new kind of holiday. Tour operators began bundling the flight, the hotel and the meals into a single cheap price and selling the whole package to working families. The turning point came in 1971, when an old rule that had forbidden operators from selling a package for less than the price of an ordinary plane ticket was finally swept away. A furious price war followed, and suddenly a week of guaranteed sunshine on a real Spanish beach cost about the same as a fortnight of gambling on the Devon weather. Why wager your one precious week of the year on English drizzle when Benidorm promised the sun in writing? The genius of the English Riviera had been to sell the Mediterranean to people who could not reach it. Now they could reach it. The imitation was competing with the original, and it was losing. If you want to see the exact moment the old world tipped into the new, it was captured, almost by accident, in the spring of 1970. A comedy troupe called Monty Python came down to Torquay to film, and they checked into a hotel called the Glen Eagles. The place was run by a former naval officer, a stiff, snobbish, spectacularly rude man who seemed to regard his own guests as an intolerable nuisance. One of the comedians was so appalled and so fascinated that he could not let it go. His name was John Cleese, and he later described the owner as the rudest man he had ever met in his life. Cleese took that hotel and that man and turned them into faulty towers. Think about what that show actually is. It is the portrait of a genteel English seaside hotel, run by a man desperate to attract a better class of guest who no longer arrives, presiding with mounting fury over his own decline. Cleese even gave the hotel a Spanish waiter, Manuel, the very nationality that was quietly emptying Torquay's bedrooms. The most famous portrait of British seaside decline ever made was set in the English Riviera, and it was written in the exact years the decline began. Sinclair sold the Gleneagles in 1973. 2 years later, the first episode of Fawlty Towers reached the nation. The joke and the tragedy were the same thing. But the comedy hid something the town could not laugh off, because what happened next to those grand hotels is the part almost nobody tells you. The fall, when it came, was gradual, a slow bleed, and that is what made it so cruel. 1973 is usually marked as the high tide of the British seaside holiday. After that, the water only went out. The visitors did not vanish overnight. Through the 1970s and into the 80s and 90s, they simply thinned, year after year, drifting away to Spain and Greece and Portugal. The grand hotels found they could not fill their rooms. And a hotel that cannot fill its rooms is a very large building with a very expensive roof and nothing coming in. So the buildings began to change their purpose. Quietly, one by one, the guest houses and the smaller hotels were carved up inside into flats and single rooms. A hotel that once let bedrooms by the week to holidaymakers could let those same rooms by the month to permanent tenants instead. The grand establishments that had once advertised comfort for gentlemen and families were subdivided into what the housing officers call houses of multiple occupation, bedsits with a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom down the hall. And because the rents were low, these rooms filled with the people who had nowhere cheaper to go, the single, the poor, the unwell, those living on benefits, often placed here from somewhere else entirely. The council fought a rearguard action to protect what it still called its holiday accommodation, drawing lines on the map to defend the old hotel districts. But you cannot legislate tourists into a town they have stopped choosing, and street by street the change went on. This is the quiet mechanism at the heart of the whole story. The architecture of the boom became the container of the bust. The very buildings that had been monuments to prosperity became, room by subdivided room, the physical shape of poverty. The palm-lined dream had a slum growing inside its own walls, and the numbers tell you it worked. Today the borough of Torbay ranks around the 48th most deprived local authority in England, out of more than 300. Roughly 1 in 6 of its neighbourhoods sits among the most deprived 10th in the entire country. And where are those neighbourhoods? They sit in the very centre of Torquay and the centre of Paignton, in the old hotel districts, the streets packed with low-value rented rooms, the very heart of what was once the fashionable resort. The most deprived ground in the English Riviera is the ground where the glamour used to stand. Now remember Agatha Christie's Ashfield, the house she loved above all others, the one she said she returned to in her dreams. In 1962 it was demolished, and a small estate of modern houses was put up in its place. Today a blue plaque marks the corner where it stood. In old age, Christie wrote that of all the houses she had ever owned, it was Ashfield she still returned to in her dreams. The birthplace of the coast's most celebrated daughter was simply erased, right at the start of the decade when the whole resort began to slip. And Ashfield was not alone. Between 1965 and 1969, the Great Imperial Hotel had its entire Victorian face stripped off and replaced with a flat modern skin, its own grandeur painted over in the rush to look up to date. The Riviera was already forgetting what it had been. Walk the coast now and you can read the whole story in the buildings. The Gleneagles, the hotel that gave the world Basil Fawlty, was pulled down in 2015, and a development of retirement flats put up on the site, which feels almost too fitting for a place long nicknamed the town for the newlywed and the nearly dead. The Palace, one of the most majestic hotels the town ever raised, closed its doors in 2017, was bought by an overseas property group, sat empty, and was eventually demolished. When the wrecking crews moved in, the neighbours across the road asked if they could keep one of its flagpoles, a last relic of a building they had loved. Another grand hotel, the Coppice, closed and stood derelict for years until a fire tore through it and gutted most of what remained. The local council has now started a scheme with a name that says everything you need to know. It is called Hotels to Homes. Its purpose is to buy up the old, unviable hotels and guest houses, the ones no tourist will ever fill again, and turn them into ordinary, affordable flats for local people. The former Brampton Court Hotel, the old Seabury Hotel, one after another, the palaces of the Golden Age are being quietly converted into somewhere for the residents to live. And where a new hotel does rise, it is often a budget chain, functional and cheap, standing where the deluxe establishments for gentlemen and families once stood. Here, though, honesty matters, because the title of this story is a provocation more than a verdict. It is not true that nobody comes to the English Riviera anymore. In high summer, the population of the bay still swells with visitors. The Grand Hotel where Agatha Christie honeymooned is still open. So is the Imperial. The coastline is beautiful, genuinely beautiful, and it holds a rare geological heritage recognised across the world. In recent years, as holidays abroad grew more expensive and more uncertain, some of the old British seaside towns have felt a flicker of return. The Riviera is not dead. People still walk beneath the palms, but the thing it was built to be is gone, and it is not coming back. It was built to be Britain's Mediterranean, an aspiration, a piece of borrowed glamour, a promise that you too could taste the South. That promise died the moment the real South went on sale at the travel agents for the price of a week in Devon. What remains is a beautiful coast carrying a heavy burden, palm trees on the front and deprivation behind them, grand hotels turned into bedsits, a place still quietly paying for a dream it could no longer afford to keep selling. And so we come back to those palm trees on the seafront, standing where they have always stood. They were the first thing the visitors saw, the sign that they had arrived somewhere warm and exotic and continental, somewhere like the Mediterranean. Look closely though, and you will see them for what they always were. Not palms from any warm southern shore, but hardy little cabbage trees carried halfway across the world, pretending in the Devon air to be something they were not. The English Riviera was the same, a brilliant, beautiful imitation of a place that lay somewhere else, and in the end, it was the real place that killed it. If you found this story worth your time, do one small thing before you go. Subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you when it lands. And if you enjoyed this, YouTube reckons you are going to like the video now showing on your screen. Go on, give it a watch.